I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Jake Lacy to talk all about the HBO Max series, The White Lotus. And kind of going back to when you were first auditioning for this, remembering that it was right early on in the beginning of the height of the pandemic, and the fact that your audition was over Zoom, your callback was over Zoom, that whole process was a very new thing at that time. I was really interested in aspects of what that experience was like in terms of kind of how you were thinking about your performance going into auditions, going into callbacks, going into, potential screen tests with that very new dynamic of having to do it in a virtual setting, because it was very left field for all of us at the beginning at that point.
Yeah, the only part that was familiar to doing that was like the self-tape element. It was something I was familiar with in terms of like living in New York and, auditioning for something that's being cast out of LA or, that sort of situation. And so that was the initial kind of introduction, was like 2 scenes and doing this tape at home and then sending it. And then, yeah, it was this weird, for anybody who doesn't do this regularly, sometimes you're like, it's a Zoom, it's you and a reader, and then there's like 9 other numbers, the faceless, that are just like, we're here, you're doing great, but you don't know if these are like someone's assistant or it's someone with their camera off just not paying attention, or if it's like an executive, or you just don't know. And so yeah, we had this like Zoom call back, and I'm like in my New York apartment, like in a corner that I would use to do this, while I think both my sons probably were like, I think during their nap time or something, and my wife is like helping me with it, and it's just kind of insane. And then you go like, hey, well, this is totally normal, this is how I always operate. And really the wonderful thing was like, this was incredible material, like from the beginning, whether it was like a Zoom audition or a tape or in person, whatever it was. To me, it was clear, like, who I thought Shane was and what I thought this tone was, and then it was really just like thrilling to get to be on with Mike and all the creatives and everybody, but really like to just get early notes and to like get to work with him for whatever it was, 15 minutes, even over Zoom, and thinking like, I think that went well. I hope he thought that went well, and then I think maybe a week later or something being like, it's down to you and one other guy, or it's you, or, what, something like that. But when it's good material, the Zoom doesn't like matter in a way. You just go like, oh, this is good. Because I've also auditioned for stuff over Zoom that's not as good material, and you go like, this is really hard. This is hard to make this kind of work on its own, but it's hard to make it work with this divide,
I love what you were saying there about having such a clear idea of who Shane was as a character and the tone as well. But I also think it's interesting that you've talked about how at the beginning of playing this character that there was that kind of journey of kind of feeling unsympathetic to him and not very empathetic to him as a character, and feeling a little judgmental of some of his actions. And that a lot of that kind of really helped having conversations with Mike White, because there's kind of this whole other perspective and this breadth that he had on the character. And I was interested in how those conversations really opened up the character for you, and it, in essence, also added a lot of layers that maybe wouldn't have been there straight off the page at the beginning.
Yeah, like when this job came around, because of like being on hold for a different show, and then the pandemic, and then sort of our whole business pulling back and shutting down, like I hadn't worked in a year or more, and I think part of kind of coming to Shane really with like some judgment on him, or was partially due to like being out of practice. It's like, if you don't do anything regularly for a year and then jump back in, at least for me, it's like all the kind of bad habits show up, and it takes a minute to like break those again, and the thing that I guess the pieces that Mike offered, like when we got to Hawaii, we had a little time to sit together and talk about like how he saw this story and these characters, and the things that he mentioned, he was like, he's like, sometimes people with a lot of money, he has noticed, like in his life, have like a paranoia built in about how they're being treated. This thing that's like, are you being rude to me, or am I misreading that? And if you are being rude to me, is it because I'm being rude, or is it because you have a presumption about who I am just because you know who I am, or I drive a certain car, or and then that leads to even further sort of living in your own bubble of like paranoia, and also then treating people a little awkwardly, and that it like only kind of exponentially grows out of this initial lack of clarity or distrust as to like how or why someone is interacting with you that way. And that to me was like the kind of the way into Shane, that every interaction is like he's trying to suss out if he's being treated that way because he's being an asshole, or if because like, or are they just making an assumption about who he is. And in equal measure, he thinks he's not a bad dude. It's like, if you're coming at me, that's because you've got some beef with your idea of me, but I'm actually a great guy. It just takes a minute to know that. And so, then the brilliance of Mike is him taking these people and putting them like in the exact circumstances in which those attributes like really flare up and grind and bubble against one another. And so that's the joy of like finding this way in. And then particularly with Alex or with Murray, to see that kind of these little like bombs go off along the way.
It also feels like he's a character who hasn't developed a lot of tools and a lot of skills that he needs in the world because of the way that he's kind of been able to exist without consequences in a lot of ways and not had to answer to things. So even the idea of his wife at the beginning with the pineapple sweet saying, why don't you just let it go? She doesn't even say it confrontationally. She's not raising her voice. And he views that as a marital spat, like we're having an argument. And that's not what that communication is at all. And so what were some of the ways in which you felt like there was almost this developmental stagnation where, he's almost had a bubble around him, a protectiveness from his parents bailing him out in a lot of ways, and where he just hasn't developed certain tools or skills or communications?
I think that the skills and tools that he has really apply to like the world he lives in. Like he's great at getting his way, and he's great at like crushing people that are in the way of his wants and needs, and he's great at getting something like done, and for a guy who like has inherited maybe an unearned position in like commercial real estate and comes from money and has grown up in a world where like the results matter and the way you get there maybe doesn't count as much. It's like he's got a great set of skills in terms of like interpersonal relationships and true happiness and a sense of self. And like those have not been fostered in him. I think in terms of like to me, he's very much like this relationship with Kitty, Molly, is like, she's taking care of all these things. Like he's a little boy still who's like looking for a new mom basically, and wants Alex, Rachel to like be that, and to be both like solving his problems and also his cheerleader, and also, to make him feel good when he feels bad, and to keep him in line, and it's like, which is an unfair expectation for anyone. And at the same time, I think like this is all, I guess, backstory, you don't really see this, but like is also very much trying to like, we sort of talked about his dad being like if Paul Bunyan and like a real estate magnate were like the same person. You know, it's like just an impossible set of shoes to fill and be like, I'm a man now too. You know, like I take up this space now because I'm in charge, and can't do that, and also can barely manage real life. You know, like normal interpersonal relationships, has to call his mom to take care of things. Like, so now I'm just rambling about Shane, but I feel like that's how he winds up with this, like, this need to both be like cared for and to be taking charge, and can't quite get what he wants in either case. I don't know if that answered your question, but that was
it really does. And, you know, he has such a fixation on the idea that he's been slighted in terms of not getting the room that he wants and expects. Did you view him as someone where, like, if it's not the pineapple suite this week, it's something else next week, and that there's always something like that, going back to what you were saying about the paranoia that he's kind of using to fill a space and fixating on?
Yeah, like I think there's I don't know if it's joy, but there's like a sort of a little charge from getting to go home after this honeymoon and say, like, you wouldn't believe how bad the service was. You just, like, ridiculous. These people are, first of all, you're paying $20,000 a night for this place, and then they don't even give you the right room. It's like he wants that story, you know? He is not interested in coming home and being like, we had a great time. If you ever go, you should check out this beach. I think you'd like it. Like, that's not, you know, like, he wants that little bit of like the entitled victim, and, you know, how dare they? And I think that's how he kind of feels like alive in the world, is to have these small confrontations and then to win. But he punches down, you know what I mean? Like, the conflict with Armand is like, the only reason Armand has any power in it is that he literally holds the keys to the room. But other than that, Shane's like, you know, he's essentially fired because of Shane. Like, you know, normally I think it doesn't go that far for Shane. It's like he chews out some valet guy, they give him free parking for the night. He gets to feel like, wow, that was, yeah, can you believe that guy? And then got away with it. But yeah, I think he looks for that. I think he wants that little bit of, it's two things. I mean, it's multiple things, but I think he wants that. And also, legitimately, I asked Dave Bernard, who's a producer on the show, when we're filming in these suites at Four Seasons, and I was like, what does this cost? Like, peak season, like, what is this per night? Because the place we're shooting is like a 6-bedroom, 5-bathroom, 2 living room, terraced, like, suite overlooking the coast. And he was like, I think it's close to $20,000 a night. So for Shane to be like, I'm spending $150,000 to be here, and you got the room wrong, that's insane. You know, like, in those terms, if you phrase it that way, at least I'd be like, give me the room I paid for. This is crazy. I just, like, you could buy a house for this. This is nuts. So I think there's both, again, like, the beauty of Mike's writing is that, like, both things are happening and both are legitimate and ridiculous at once. To be like, he is being lied to. He is given the wrong room. He's paying an exorbitant fee for the wrong room. And at the same time, you've already won. Why are you picking fights? You have the second most beautiful room in the entire hotel. Like, relax, just enjoy. Yeah.
What I love as well in the entire series and all of the interactions with Armand and the different ways that he kind of keeps bringing it up and keeps asking about it. You know, it's one minute he's going to Armand, the next he's kind of over there kind of going to the German couple, and both in the writing and your performance, every time that he's kind of pushing the same thing, it feels like there's new fuel and new energy and different reasons why he's honing in on it. And so what was that like in you know, looking at the writing and kind of finding those elements in your performance where it's like, okay, how is he going to ask this time? Because he can't just ask the same way every time, because that just becomes very repetitious. But each time you're giving us new windows into this character throughout.
I think it's like you know, that thing with the German couple was so funny to me. He's like talking to them and so friendly. And then I remember like coming back and sitting next to Alex and just like looking at her and waiting for her to be like, who are they? You know? And Mike was like, hide it, like don't even make a thing of it. Just like pretend like it's not a thing. Like she knows exactly who that is, you know? And to just be trying to like, you know, that Shane just like is underplaying any of it, to be like, oh yeah, I don't know, the guy's a liar. You know, like low key just trying to quietly reintroduce the idea. And then other times being like, again, like, you know, like we were saying, like he's so engaged by the fight, by the little like high of the conflict, of the intrigue, of like the plot thickens, you know. He's like so there's another thing where like did it get, you know, it's like all credit to Mike, just deferring to Mike's ability here, but like where like Rachel and I are at breakfast and Armand passes us by and I try to get his attention and he just keeps going. And Mike was like, it's so fun when Shane is like laughing at it and also is furious, you know, that he's like, you know, like that like the angry idiot is like such a fun thing to watch. And then to see him try to like focus with Rachel again, you know. So I guess it's in the writing is really what I'm saying, or that I felt like Mike and I got on so well in terms of like me offering up a thing or feeling like so trusting with him as to be like, I'm going to do this. And then him coming over and either like twisting that or being like, do more of it, like go crazier with that, you know, or it's just like this really wonderful, getting real artsy here, but like this little dance between like a director and or like a, you know, someone you're working with, another actor, and what you bring, and that they like, if they have this point of view and they're prepared, and then this little like kind of dance that you get to do together, it's like the sum is greater than the parts. It's like then you wind up with this thing in which I would love to be able to sit here and be like, oh well, I made a bunch of genius choices and that's the only reason it looks that way, you know. But the reality is like Mike created this incredible script and this wonderful character, and you know, to be with the rest of this cast who are also like offering up these wonderful things to like play off of and fight against, and then really like the editing. Like when I saw this all cut together, I felt like when we were doing it, I was really fulfilled and felt like there was levels and intrigue and all these things that you think like, I think this is good, but who knows? And then to see the edit and to see how they built like tension and which takes they chose to use and all these things, it's like, it just is such a group effort to like get to this place where a performance of, you know, linearly sort of cohesively seems to be by my design or it's my accomplishment, but the reality is like there's between 5 and 50 other people between like me reading this script and someone seeing it that kind of puts all those pieces together in a way that works or doesn't, you know. So
yeah,
I hope these aren't the longest possible answer. We're not like,
no, I love it though. There's so much fascinating detail and insight into the character and it all coming together. And what you were saying before about when he's talking to the German couple and then she asks him about it, and the fact that he's not even trying to hide it is a great point about the character overall as well, because he's not trying to pretend that he's anything other than what he is. He's not trying to lie and manipulate and gaslight. He's very on the surface. And was that something that you saw very early on in the way that Mike had written him on the page, or was there a moment where that kind of clicked into you, like, oh, he's very truthful in who he is, whether that's a good or bad thing at different points?
Yes, that, like, there's both like this gulf between how he perceives himself and how the world perceives him, you know, in terms of like, is he a good guy? Is he fun? Is he, you know, any number of things. But the stuff that's like, I forget if it stayed in or not, but there's like conversations with Rachel in particular where he's like, I don't understand what the problem is. Like, I want to have sex with you a bunch. I think my wife is hot. I just want to be on vacation with you. Like, I don't understand what the problem is, you know, and the problem is that she would like to have like some emotional connection and someone who understands her on a level beyond like, this is fun. And it's not that, I don't know if it's fair to say he doesn't have those levels or layers, but he certainly doesn't have access to them. And if he does, they're really only like fear-based. They're not, he's not opening himself, you know, like the most vulnerable he gets to her is saying like, this has happened before. Like, people have been coming for me my whole life. You know, like, thinks that he's the consummate victim of, I'm so entitled and so wealthy that it's actually like a gilded cage. Or really at the airport where he is scared that like she's gone forever. And he's like a kid who's like lost at the amusement park, you know, like separated from his mom and doesn't know where to go. It's like, that's the only time he's really in touch with like something else. But he is very, like, his wealth, his like access, his place in the world allows him to kind of be exactly what he is without anyone going like, you really should not be that way, or shouldn't you offer more to the world, and like does not need to, which in a way is again, you know, like all credit to Mike, but that like Armand is a liar, you know, like the opening of their relationship is that he's lying about messing up the rooms and knowing that he did it and playing it off like it's the right room. And, you know, like, and the inverse is that Shane's a dick who's got a lot of money, you know, like that those are the things that are kind of battling one another. And so you're like, well, who's in the right there? And like, what does that say about my own value system as a viewer as to whose side I'm on, you know?
Yeah. And you're mentioning there the scene at the airport. And one of the things that's so great about that scene is that we're not seeing the middle journey of what happens after he stabs Armand. You know, we see that altercation, we see that moment, we see the fact that it wasn't intentional. And then the next moment we see him is him sitting alone at the airport before Rachel shows up. And so there's so many layers that come into that very short scene for your character. Did you and Mike talk at all about how you felt like that time in between played out? Or was that something that was useful to you to kind of bridge that gap and fill out that space? Because even the fact that, you know, does Rachel even know what happened yet? Because she wasn't staying in the hotel room that night.
There's one, like, in between those two, there's one like slow motion shot where like I'm speaking to the local authorities. Yeah. And it was shot in slow-mo. I didn't realize we were doing slow-mo at the time, but like essentially those cops are saying like, they're like patting me on the back and being like, I'm so sorry for what happened here. You know, like, and Shane is somewhere between like, yeah, thanks, you know, and just like in shock of having killed a person, you know. And so that, you know, again, like just informs is like par for the course with him, you know, that people like apologize for having to run a breathalyzer test on him because maybe he's been, you know, it's like anybody else, you go like, this is how the law works. You don't get to, you can't just like skirt around it and oops, sorry, this happened. But yes, that like, yeah, that scene, I don't know, is sort of sits kind of heavy, that like wondering if she'll come back. I do think that I think Rachel knows what happens. I don't think like they sort of reunite and then on the plane home, he's like, you know, I killed the guy last night. You know, like I don't think it's like a reveal to her where she's like, I've made a huge mistake. I think she is aware and I think is like so entirely stuck that some mix of being stuck and some mix of you know, willfully participating in the like, you know, people saying there's two sides to that story and you're like, well, one person had a knife. You know, like I guess there are two sides, but she is, by sort of being there, is enabling his narrative, you know, not to say she's an accomplice, you know what I mean? Like, but like this kind of sticking around and saying like, it's okay, like we'll be back together. And does let him believe like, boy, I was really, it was a crazy night last night. And I he is the victim, you know, he like kills a person and still thinks like, I've had a pretty tough couple of days, you know.
He'll have some great stories to tell at parties that summer, being like, a guy had the audacity to die in front of me.
You know what? There's like an actual case where it's a very interesting, I mean, it's, you know, real, not this like sort of fictional thing, but that like a white guy from the Northeast was down on vacation, claimed that a staff at the hotel had like broken into his room and stolen something and was trying to leave, and they got in this altercation, and he like, you know, essentially like slammed him into the wall, and it created this hemorrhaging, and the guy died, and like the cultural implications of every piece of it, but essentially like it's almost identical. It's almost identical to this kind of status issue of like employer employee, of violence, of like only two people there who knows what happened. And I wonder for that guy, is he just a pariah back home? You know, not that, again, not like, oh, he didn't do something bad, but just like in regard to Shane, you know, I'm talking about this character like he's continued to live. It's a TV show. Do you know what I mean? Like it's over when those credits roll. But in my mind, it's like, where does that go? And to me, he, the paranoia that we talked about at, you know, early on, like only has only grown, where now everywhere he goes, you know, someone's like whispering it all. He's like, is that about me? Is it about me and the thing at the hotel? You know, like, and what does he do with that? You know, does he like then just live in his enormous house and not leave? Or is he like intentionally staying at other White Lotus locations to be like, I'm here, I'm innocent, I can go wherever I want? You know, like how does that work in his brain? But I guess Mike would know that and not me.
But I'm so fascinated by that idea now. I mean, I think between Mike's writing and your performance, it's such a fantastic character with so many layers that I think in other hands just wouldn't have had that level of depth. So congratulations on everything with the show and the Emmy nomination. And thank you so much for talking about it, Jake.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. Thanks.